Emilio Gutierrez, a retired schoolteacher, stares at the last slip of his pension fund, his lifeline, knowing he has mere months to live. Diagnosed with terminal cancer, he clings to hope when a mysterious stranger offers him a miracle cure for an astronomical price. Desperate to live, Emilio risks everything, draining his life savings for the promise of a second chance. But when the so-called cure leads to shocking betrayal and tragedy, Emilio's final days take an unimaginable turn. Emilio Gutierrez had spent a lifetime in San Isidro, a quiet countryside town where days passed with comforting simplicity. For 40 years, he inspired students with stories of heroes and revolutions as a history teacher. His life was modest but rich, tending his garden, reading by the window, and sharing evenings with Clara, his wife of 4 decades. Together, they nurtured a dream, a small house by the beach where they could spend their twilight years. Recently, however, life had grown heavier for Emilio. A dull ache in his abdomen turned persistent, accompanied by exhaustion that left him struggling to rise each morning. Tasks he once enjoyed, like watering his plants, now felt insurmountable. Clara noticed the changes before he did. "Emilio, this isn't normal," she said one evening, her voice firm. "You need to see a doctor." Reluctantly, Emilio agreed. The town clinic, with its peeling walls and outdated equipment, wasn't reassuring, but Dr. Rivera, a kind-faced woman, listened carefully as Emilio described his symptoms. She ordered tests, her reassuring smile not masking the concern in her eyes. Days later, the couple returned for the results, but her demeanor had changed. "There are abnormalities," Dr. Rivera said gently. "I'll need to refer you to a specialist in the city." The word abnormalities echoed in Emilio's mind as he and Clara made the long journey to the city hospital. There, amidst the clinical sterility of white walls and bustling staff, they met the specialist. His words were calm but devastating. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer," he said, flipping through Emilio's chart. "At this stage, we focus on managing symptoms and improving quality of life." The words hit Emilio like a physical blow. Clara gasped softly beside him, gripping his hand tightly. Emilio stared at the floor, his mind racing. Stage 4? No cure? He thought of their dream house by the sea, of the years he thought he still had. All of it felt impossibly distant now. The bus ride back to San Isidro was silent. Emilio watched fields and hills roll by, the beauty of the countryside tinged with melancholy. Memories surfaced unbidden, his proudest moments as a teacher, the nights spent dreaming with Clara, the laughter of children who had filled his classroom. Now, those memories felt like chapters of a book rapidly closing. That evening, Emilio sat on their porch, the setting sun casting long shadows. Clara joined him, her eyes red from crying but her voice steady. "We'll face this together," she said, her hand resting on his. "Whatever time we have, we'll make it count." Emilio nodded, though the weight of his diagnosis pressed on him like a stone. The sands of time felt as though they were slipping through his fingers, faster than he could grasp. Yet, as Clara's hand gripped his, he realized he wouldn't face this alone. Whatever lay ahead, they would confront it side by side. The days following the diagnosis passed in a haze for Emilio. His world felt heavy with meaning. Every small detail seemed to whisper of finality. The creak of the wooden chair on the porch, the hum of cicadas at dusk, Clara's hand brushing his, all of it reminded him of the word terminal, echoing in his mind. Clara tried to keep things normal. She cooked Emilio's favorite meals, even though he barely touched them. She busied herself with household chores, humming softly as though rhythm alone could ward off the weight of their reality. But Emilio saw through her efforts. Her lingering touches and forced smiles revealed her fear. "Do you want to talk about it?" Clara asked one evening as they sat on the porch, the last light of day casting long shadows across their yard. Her voice was steady, but Emilio could hear the crack beneath the surface. "I don't know how," he replied, his voice low. "It feels like everything is slipping away." Clara gripped his hand tightly. "Then let's start with what we have now. We still have time, Emilio. Maybe not as much as we'd hoped, but it's ours. Let's not waste it." Her words stayed with him, igniting a flicker of determination. Emilio decided to make the most of whatever days lay ahead. He returned to his garden, though his movements were slower, his body aching with every step. He reread his favorite books and began writing letters, to his daughter in the city, to former students, and to Clara. In these letters he poured out his memories, regrets, and the lessons life had taught him. Writing gave him a sense of purpose, a way to leave behind something meaningful. One morning, as he sat scribbling at his desk, Clara approached him with a hesitant smile. "I've been thinking," she said, "about our beach house. Maybe it's not too late to go." Emilio looked up in surprise. "Clara, we never bought the land. We were saving for it, remember?" "I know," she admitted, her smile faltering. "But maybe we don't need a house. Maybe just seeing the ocean will be enough." Emilio hesitated. The thought of traveling in his condition seemed daunting, but Clara's eyes held a spark he hadn't seen in weeks, a glimmer of hope. He couldn't extinguish it. "All right," he said finally. "Let's go see the ocean." The next day, Clara began preparing for their trip. She packed carefully, slipping in the letters Emilio had written. Emilio watched her, a mix of apprehension and anticipation stirring within him. The ocean had always been their shared dream, a symbol of the life they wanted to build. Now, it felt like a final chapter, a goodbye to the future they would never fully realize. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, Emilio and Clara sat hand in hand on the porch. For the first time in weeks, Emilio felt calm. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for now, he was content to sit beside Clara and savor what time remained. "I hope the ocean is everything we dreamed it would be," Clara said softly. "It will be," Emilio replied, squeezing her hand, "because we'll see it together." The journey to the ocean was harder than Emilio anticipated. He hadn't traveled far from San Isidro in years, and the long bus ride left him drained. The crowded bus smelled of sweat and gasoline, and Clara fussed over him, adjusting the scarf around his shoulders and offering sips of water. Emilio leaned against the window, watching the scenery change. Mountains gave way to sprawling plains, and then to small bustling towns. For a fleeting moment, excitement stirred within him. The ocean had always been their dream, something enduring and vast. By the time they arrived in Santa Elena, a coastal town, Emilio was visibly weaker. Clara steadied him as they stepped off the bus, her arm firm around his waist. The scent of salt and seaweed filled the air, and the distant sound of crashing waves reached his ears. He paused to take it all in, his chest rising and falling with effort. "We're here," Clara said softly, her voice tinged with both relief and sadness. Emilio nodded faintly, too tired to speak. Clara had arranged for them to stay at a modest inn near the beach. Their small room overlooked the ocean, and as soon as they arrived, Emilio collapsed onto the bed, his body aching. "Rest for now," Clara said, sitting beside him. "We'll see the ocean later." When Emilio woke, the room glowed with the golden light of late afternoon. Clara stood by the window, gazing out at the waves. She turned when she heard him stir. "Are you ready?" With her help, Emilio walked to the shore. The cool sand pressed beneath his feet, and the salty breeze brushed against his face. As they approached the water, Clara held him steady with every step. The vast ocean stretched before them, waves rolling in rhythmic, calming patterns. "It's even more beautiful than I imagined," Clara said, her voice soft. Emilio nodded. "It's everything we dreamed of." They found a spot near the water's edge, sitting together in silence. The setting sun painted the sky with hues of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over the waves. Emilio felt a profound peace, as though the ocean had momentarily washed away his fears. Clara broke the silence. "Emilio," she said hesitantly, "this isn't the life we planned. But I'm glad we're here. I'm glad we did this together." Emilio reached for her hand. "I am too," he replied. "Thank you for bringing me here. It's perfect." They stayed until the sun dipped below the horizon. As the sky darkened, Emilio's heart felt lighter, as though he had reclaimed a piece of himself. For the first time since his diagnosis, he felt whole. That night, as Clara slept beside him, Emilio sat by the window, staring out at the moonlit ocean. He clutched one of the letters he had written, the one addressed to Clara. He knew his time was slipping away, but this trip had given him something precious, a memory they could both cherish, a moment that transcended his illness. For the first time in weeks, Emilio smiled. The next morning, Emilio woke to the sound of seagulls and waves crashing against the shore. Sunlight poured through the window of their small room at the inn, casting a warm glow. Clara sat by the window, a cup of coffee in hand, and greeted him with a soft smile. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Tired," Emilio admitted, stretching his sore body. "But I'm glad we're here." They shared a simple breakfast of bread and fruit Clara had picked up from the market. Though Emilio's appetite was weak, he savored the moment. Clara seemed lighter that morning, her worry momentarily replaced by a quiet happiness. "Let's walk along the beach again," Clara suggested. Emilio agreed, and they made their way back to the shore. The sand was cool beneath their feet, and the salty breeze carried the soothing rhythm of the waves. Clara collected shells, holding each one to the light, marveling at their unique patterns. Emilio watched her, smiling at her childlike wonder, a rare glimpse of the carefree spirit he hadn't seen in years. They came across a small group of fishermen mending their nets near the water's edge. Clara struck up a conversation with one of them, a wiry man with a sun-worn face. He spoke of the tides, the fish they caught, and the stories passed down through generations. Emilio listened intently, drawn into the cadence of his tales. At one point, the fisherman turned to Emilio. "Would you like to take a boat ride?" he asked. "It's calm today. Perfect for it." Emilio hesitated, unsure if his body could handle it. But before he could decline, Clara chimed in. "That sounds wonderful. What do you think?" Emilio glanced at her hopeful face. "Let's do it," he said finally. The fisherman helped them into a small wooden boat, steadying Emilio as he climbed aboard. The boat rocked gently as they pushed off, and soon they were gliding across the water. A cool breeze brushed Emilio's face, and for the first time in weeks, he felt free, untethered from his illness. The ocean stretched endlessly around them, its surface shimmering in the sunlight. Clara leaned over the edge, trailing her fingers in the water. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is," Emilio replied, his heart full. The fishermen shared stories about the sea, pointing out distant landmarks and the constellations sailors used to navigate. Emilio listened, momentarily forgetting his frailty. For a short while, he felt like himself again. When they returned to shore, Emilio was exhausted but content. Clara helped him back to the inn, where he rested for the afternoon. That evening, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun sink below the horizon. "I think today was one of the best days of my life," Emilio said softly. Clara turned to him, her eyes glistening. "Mine, too. Thank you for saying yes." Emilio smiled. "Thank you for making me brave enough to try." As the stars appeared, Emilio felt a peace he hadn't known in weeks. The ocean, vast and timeless, had reminded him that even in fleeting moments, life could be beautiful. For the first time in a long while, Emilio allowed himself to hope, not for a cure, but for more days like this, filled with love and quiet wonders. The days blurred together as Emilio poured his strength into completing their story. His notebook filled quickly, capturing decades of love, sacrifice, and hope. Each day began with the sound of the ocean, hours of writing, and ended with quiet moments on the shore beside Clara. One afternoon, Clara entered the room with a small package wrapped in brown paper. She placed it on the desk with a smile. "I saw this at the market," she said. "I thought it might help." Emilio unwrapped it to reveal a leather-bound journal, its cover smooth and sturdy. He traced his fingers over it, emotion catching in his throat. "It's beautiful." "I thought you could rewrite everything in it," Clara said. "Something permanent." Touched, Emilio began transcribing his words into the new journal that evening. The act of rewriting brought him closer to the memories, reliving each moment as his pen moved across the pages. It gave him purpose, yet he couldn't ignore the creeping fear. What would happen when the final word was written? Would it feel like an ending or a release? One night, as Emilio stared at the moonlit ocean, Clara joined him. "You're almost done, aren't you?" she asked softly. Emilio nodded. "It feels like saying goodbye." Clara placed her hand over his. "Maybe it's not goodbye. Maybe it's a way of holding on." The next morning, Emilio resolved to finish the journal. He wrote tirelessly, pausing only when his body demanded rest. By evening, the final page was filled. He ran his hand over the cover and let out a deep breath. "It's done," he whispered. Clara looked at him with a mixture of pride and sadness. "You've given me a gift I'll treasure forever," she said. That night, they sat together on the beach under a sky full of stars. Emilio handed her the journal, his hands trembling slightly. "This is yours now," he said. "Everything I am, everything we've shared, it's all in there." Clara held it close to her chest. "I'll keep it safe," she promised. As they sat in silence, Emilio felt an unexpected peace. The journal had been more than a project. It was his way of preparing, of finding closure. Now, with Clara beside him, he felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. The next morning, Emilio woke with a heaviness he hadn't felt before. His body, once resilient despite his illness, seemed to surrender. Clara stayed by his side, holding his hand and speaking softly, recounting their life together. Her voice, gentle and steady, was a balm to his fading spirit. By evening, Emilio mustered the strength to speak. "Clara," he whispered, "thank you for everything. You've been my greatest joy." Tears streamed down her face as she kissed his hand. "And you've been mine," she said. As the sun set over Santa Elena, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Emilio closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, the sound of the ocean his final lullaby. Though his journey had ended, the love he and Clara shared remained, etched in the journal and in her heart forever. After Emilio's passing, Santa Elena felt quieter for Clara. The small coastal town, once alive with shared dreams, now seemed suspended in time. The innkeeper and neighbors who had grown fond of Emilio treated Clara with gentle kindness, but his absence weighed heavily. She often held the leather-bound journal, her fingers running over its cover as if to feel his presence. Clara decided to stay in Santa Elena a little longer. The sound of the waves and the routine they had shared brought her solace. Each morning she sat by the ocean with the journal resting on her lap, though she couldn't yet open it. Her heart ached too much to read his words. One afternoon at the market, Clara overheard fishermen speaking about a teacher who had once changed the lives of local children. Their conversation reminded her of Emilio's love for teaching. A spark ignited within her, a quiet calling to carry his legacy forward. That evening, back at the inn, Clara finally opened the journal. The sight of Emilio's handwriting brought fresh tears, but she kept reading. His words wrapped around her like a warm embrace, recounting their life together with tenderness and hope. Through his reflections, she felt the depth of Emilio's love and his belief in the beauty of life. Emilio's final entry read, "Clara, The time we've shared is my greatest treasure. But this isn't just for us. Share our story. Let it bring hope to others, as you've always brought hope to me." Clara closed the journal, her hands trembling. The waves echoed in the distance as she made a decision. The next day, she visited the local library, a small building tucked between brightly painted shops. She found a quiet corner filled with worn books and approached the librarian. "I want to start a reading group," Clara said, "for the children." The librarian smiled. "What stories will you share?" Clara held the journal close. Stories of love, courage, and hope. Within days, Clara began gathering children on the library steps, reading aloud from the lessons and stories Emilio had written. She wove his teachings into their conversations, sharing messages of kindness, resilience, and history. The children listened intently, their wide eyes filled with wonder. For Clara, it felt as though Emilio lived on through their eager faces. As weeks passed, the group grew. Parents began joining quietly, listening as Clara shared not only Emilio's words but also her own, stories of their dreams, the house they never built, and the love that had sustained them. Her voice carried Emilio's spirit, ensuring his legacy extended beyond the journal's pages. One evening, watching the children run along the shore, Clara felt peace for the first time since Emilio's passing. The journal no longer felt like a weight. It was a bridge connecting her to him and the world he loved. She whispered to the ocean breeze, "We're still together, Emilio. Your story is theirs now." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara realized her purpose wasn't in letting go, but in holding on and sharing what they had built together. Clara's reading group became a fixture in Santa Elena. Each week, more children and parents gathered at the library, their laughter filling the once quiet space. What began as a tribute to Emilio had grown into a thriving community, bound by shared stories and lessons of hope. One afternoon, Lucia, a young mother attending the readings, approached Clara. "Mrs. Gutierrez," she began, "thank you. My son used to hate reading, but now he can't stop asking about your stories." Clara smiled warmly. "The stories aren't mine, Lucia. They're for all of us." Lucia hesitated before continuing. "Would you consider helping the local school? The children don't have many books, and the teachers could really use someone like you." Clara felt a mix of surprise and purpose. She hadn't considered stepping into such a role, but the idea excited her. "I'd love to," she said. That week, Clara visited the small school on the edge of town. The building was modest, its walls faded from years of salty air. Inside, eager children and hardworking teachers made the most of limited resources. Clara offered to hold storytelling sessions and help the children create their own tales. The teachers welcomed her warmly. Soon, Clara was spending more time at the school, encouraging the children to write about their lives, dreams, and families. Together, they filled the library's shelves with heartfelt stories, each a testament to the creativity and resilience of Santa Elena's youth. One day, while helping a boy named Mateo with his story, he looked up and asked, "Who taught you to tell stories like this?" Clara paused, her throat tightening. "My husband, Emilio," she said. "He loved stories and taught me how powerful they can be." Mateo's eyes widened. "Can you tell us more about him?" Clara smiled. "I think he would like that very much." From then on, Clara wove Emilio's lessons into her sessions. She shared his love for history, his belief in community, and his unshakable hope. The children listened intently, their questions breathing new life into Emilio's spirit. As months passed, Clara's connection with the school deepened. She helped organize a festival where the children presented their stories through skits and readings. Parents and neighbors filled the small auditorium, their pride shining in their smiles. The event was a resounding success, uniting the community in a way Clara hadn't seen before. That evening, Clara walked along the beach, Emilio's journal in her hands. She stopped by the water's edge and reread his final words. Share our story. Let it bring hope to others. I hope I'm doing it right, she whispered to the waves. The gentle rhythm seemed to answer, carrying her words into the horizon. As Clara turned back toward the town, her heart felt lighter. Emilio's story was no longer hers alone. It had become part of something greater. In the laughter of children, the pride of parents, and the strength of the community, Clara saw the legacy she and Emilio had built. And as the stars appeared in the night sky, Clara knew she had found her place, not just in Santa Elena, but in the hearts of those she had touched. As the seasons changed in Santa Elena, Clara's life blossomed in ways she never imagined. Her small reading group had grown into a community project, uniting parents, teachers, and local leaders. Inspired by her dedication, the town rallied to refurbish the library, painting its walls in bright colors and filling its shelves with donated books. One morning, as Clara arrived at the library, the librarian greeted her with excitement. "Clara, you need to see this," she said, leading her to a table. On it lay a stack of letters from neighboring towns. They had heard about the reading group and wanted to start their own. Clara picked up a letter. "Your work has inspired us," it read. "We would love your guidance." Tears welled in her eyes as she realized the reach of what she and Emilio had started. That afternoon, Clara sat by the beach with Emilio's journal in her lap. "You were right," she whispered to the waves. "Our story is spreading." She imagined Emilio's quiet voice reassuring her. "I always knew it would." In the weeks that followed, Clara traveled to nearby towns, helping them establish their own reading programs. Each visit felt like an extension of Emilio's legacy. She shared stories from the journal, drawing strength from the life they had built together. One evening, after a long day, Clara returned to the beach. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to pause. As she opened the journal, a small child approached. It was Mateo, from her reading group. "Mrs. Gutierrez," he said, holding a piece of paper, "I wrote this for you." Clara took the paper, her eyes scanning the handwriting. It was a story about a teacher who traveled the world, spreading stories and hope. The teacher's name was Clara. "You wrote this?" Clara asked, her voice thick with emotion. Mateo nodded. "You told me stories could change the world." Clara hugged him gently. "Thank you, Mateo. This is a gift I'll treasure." That night, Clara placed Mateo's story in the journal, tucking it among Emilio's pages. It felt like a bridge between the past and future. As the months passed, Clara's work continued to grow. The reading program spread to distant communities where children eagerly awaited the chance to hear and create stories. Clara's name became synonymous with hope, though she never sought recognition. For her, it was always about Emilio, the man who believed in the power of stories. One day, while packing for another visit, Clara paused to look at the journal. Its edges were frayed and its cover worn, but its contents remained as vibrant as the day Emilio had written them. She pressed it to her chest, closing her eyes. "Thank you, my love," she whispered, "for giving me the courage to do this." As Clara left the room, the sound of the ocean followed her, a reminder of the love that brought her here and the legacy she carried forward. In every story she shared and every child she inspired, Emilio lived on. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Clara knew she wasn't just sharing stories. She was building a future, one word at a time. Years passed, and Clara's work spread far beyond Santa Elena. The reading program she had inspired grew into a network of initiatives, bringing stories and hope to countless children and families. Her name became known in distant places, but Clara always attributed the success to Emilio. One summer evening, Clara returned to Santa Elena, sitting on the beach where she and Emilio had shared so many moments. She held the journal, its edges frayed and pages worn from years of travel. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she whispered, "We did it, Emilio. Your story has touched so many lives." Clara opened the journal, flipping through its pages. It had become more than Emilio's story. It now contained letters and reflections from children and communities. One page held a note from Matteo, now a young teacher, thanking Clara for helping him find his voice. Another was a letter from a parent in a distant village, expressing gratitude for the hope her programs had brought. Reading these messages, Clara felt Emilio's presence, a quiet reassurance that their love had transcended time and space. That evening, Clara walked to the water's edge with the journal in her hands. She had decided it was time to let it go, not as a goodbye but as a way of honoring Emilio's memory. Kneeling by the shore, she let the waves touch the journal's edges. "Thank you, Emilio," she said softly, "for everything." With a deep breath, she released the journal into the water, watching as the waves carried it away. The moonlight reflected off its cover until it disappeared into the horizon. Clara stood there for a long time, the ocean's rhythm soothing her soul. She knew their story would live on in the hearts of the people they had touched. That night, Clara sat by the window in her room, looking out at the ocean. "We did it, Emilio," she whispered, "and I'll keep going." In the years that followed, Clara mentored younger storytellers, passing on the lessons Emilio had taught her. The reading programs grew, creating ripples of change that reached places she could only dream of. On what would have been Emilio's 80th birthday, Santa Elena held a celebration in their honor. Children performed skits based on stories from the journal, and parents spoke of how the programs had transformed their lives. Sitting quietly in the audience, Clara felt her heart swell as she watched the community come together. That evening, Clara returned to the beach. The stars glittered above, and the waves shimmered in the moonlight. She closed her eyes, feeling Emilio's presence in the gentle breeze and the endless rhythm of the ocean. "Thank you, my love," she said, her voice steady, "for showing me that even the smallest story can change the world." As she turned to leave, the wind brushed her face, carrying with it the warmth of a memory, a love that had never truly left her. And as the waves continued their eternal dance, Clara walked forward, ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing their story would live on forever.